We hear a lot of perspectives on the Mankind podcast. Inclusion of a guest is not an endorsement of their views, and the opinions expressed here do not always represent the mission or values of the Mankind Project USA.
Looks like the rain has gone.
You've got one, I've got one. Every man has one. Some have small ones and others have bigger. You've guessed it, today we're going to be talking all about your shadow. Now, if this is your first time joining us for the Mankind podcast, I'm your host, Brandon Clift, and it is my pleasure to welcome you to the show where men come to get away from media's magnifying glass and get a chance to speak openly and freely about the challenges that face men. And in case you're wondering, this is not an echo chamber for men to complain, blame, or make excuses for their lives, but instead a place where we come together to learn new ways to create accountability, develop tools, and take ownership for our lives. Now, Carl Jung, one of history's greatest psychologists and thinkers, said, "A neurosis is not a disgrace. It is not a fatal disease, but it does grow worse to the degree that one is determined to ignore it." Now, what was once considered neurosis back in the early 20th century is now what we more commonly understand as the shadow aspect of the human psyche. Now, in more basic layman terms, so basically my language, it's more easily defined as the parts of myself that I want nothing to do with. And so what I do is I shove that stuff deep down in an attempt to hide it from myself and especially hide it from others. But just like its name, you can bet that despite our greatest efforts to hide, repress, and deny these parts of ourselves, the shadow is always going to follow us everywhere we go. And when we least want it to, it's going to rear its ugly head because the shadow has a phenomenal gift of sabotaging our progress in life. So whether you like it or not, we've all got some shadow stuff to deal with that's hiding inside of us. And you can be sure that despite your best efforts to hide it behind an impressive and attractive outward image, that stuff will just turn up in your intimate relationships, professional endeavors, handling of money, personal development, and I know you were hoping I wouldn't say this, it also turns up in your sex life. This is why for the next month, we're going to be inviting world-renowned authors, writers, researchers, and professionals, each with their own unique take on the many facets of how our shadow can interfere in our lives. Covering topics like relationships, money, power, sexuality, parenthood, and personal development, each guest is going to give you insights into how you can explore, discover, and address each of these many facets, giving you the tools to reclaim power over your shadow. So to kick off our descent into the darkness that is shadow work, I wanted to make sure that we brought out the big guns by inviting Dr. David Gruder to break down everything you need to know about shadow. Now, David is a ritual elder in the Mankind Project and has been involved with us for almost 20 years. He is a co-architect of MKP's Shadow Watcher program and responsible for shaping the way we take Jung's writings on the shadow to deliver it into easily digestible life skills and tools that all of us can understand and apply. Best-selling author, award-winning strategist, quoted as America's integrity expert, David has many claims to his name, but none more so than his affectionately self-titled description as a recovering psychologist, professional troublemaker, and survivor of Woodstock 69. So if you've ever wondered how to get a grip on your shadowy bits, then you have come to the best place for it. So that's enough from me. Here's my interview with the professional troublemaker himself, Dr. David Gruder. Enjoy. G'day and welcome to another live recording of the Mankind podcast, the show where we break the molds of modern manhood to prove that there's more than just one way to be a man. And today we're joined by international speaker, author, teacher, consultant, men's work expert, and shadow expert, David Gruder, to cover basically this term, this word, shadow, that is becoming increasingly popular in today's day and age. Now that all the cool hip kids are getting into personal work and shadow work, I think it's time that we cover one of the most foundational elements of personal development, which is shadow. So David, mate, take a moment for those that haven't heard of you to introduce yourself, and we'll get underway.
Sure. Well, on a more formal level, my doctorate's in clinical and organizational development psychology. And so my career has largely been at the intersection of leader development and culture architecture in businesses and nonprofits and with people in governance and things along those lines. And of course, in all organizations, for-profits, nonprofits, agencies, all organizations have shadow running around in them that's undermining their functioning. And so doing shadow work in organizations is part of what I've been doing for my entire career. At this point in my career, as an elder, I'm also a ritual elder in the Mankind Project, and the one of the core co-developers of the Mankind Project's Shadow Watcher program. But at this point in my career as an elder, I consider myself a recovering psychologist and professional troublemaker.
Well, I got to tell you, David, when I was poking around within the kind of back end of the Mankind Project, speaking to different men, saying who's going to be the person to come on to talk about shadow, unanimously, every single one of them said your name. Mm-hmm. They said it's going to be fun, it's going to be cheeky, it's going to be insightful. So I'm looking forward to it because, you know, we go deep in a lot of topics as it pertains to the work we do in the project and what we talk about on this podcast. And shadow is one of those kind of rudimentary elements that we have in our work that I think sometimes gets addressed, but it's one of the earliest things we learn of when we get involved. So I think sometimes it's easy to have this early snapshot of what it means, use that early snapshot as the foundation for all personal development, but there's actually more intricacies to shadow that you've taught me in the conversations we've had recently. So, mate, can you just give us a broad understanding of shadow and shadow work? Because I think because it's becoming so popular today, I think it's important that we really just get to the basics of understanding what it actually is.
Sure. Well, the term shadow is a term that was coined originally about 100 years ago by an early pioneer in the field of psychology and psychotherapy by the name of Carl Jung, Jung. And he coined the term shadow for the parts of us that are outside of our awareness and are running us, even though we don't know those things are running us. And so in the Mankind Project, when men are first exposed to the notion of shadow, they're given a simple, easy to remember definition of shadow that I think is very valuable as an entry level definition, which is the parts of us that we hide, repress, and deny.
Hide, repress, deny. That's the calling card for shadow.
It's the calling card for the introduction to shadow that is provided in the Mankind Project. And I love that as an entry point because it's easy to remember and it captures a lot of the essential qualities of shadow. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. So in order to make shadow clearer to people who aren't familiar with that term, which it's a little difficult as a term because it's not self-defining. We have to really go into defining it. The term that I use in the business consulting work and leader development work that I do is blind spots. Because everybody understands the concept of having blind spots. And that's
absolutely
that's another very simple way of of introducing people to the notion of shadow. It's blind spots that run us without us knowing it.
Yeah. Yeah. The interesting thing about, for my journey getting into shadow work, was by giving it a name like that, like a blind spot or shadow, it allowed me a chance to separate myself, my own identity, my self-worth from this blind spot, this shadow that is inherently behind me, kind of following me around and controlling some of my behaviors. So I like that because it kind of gamifies it in a sense. It makes it personal, but not identity defining, as you mentioned before. So I'm curious, where does shadow come from? If it's a blind spot, how does it get there?
Well, it develops for really important and life-saving reasons. And so how shadow develops is it goes all the way back to childhood. And we have a fundamental need to survive as children. And in order to survive, we need love. And of all of the many ways that are important to express love to children, like a roof over their heads and clothing and education and healthcare and all of those things, there are only 3 varieties of love that actually feel like love to us as children. And that's heart connection, validation, and safety. Everything else that's loving to offer children is really important to offer them, but those are the only forms of love that register as love to us as children. When we're not feeling a sufficient amount of those kinds of love in forms that mean something to us, that land in us, we actually set forth on the first hero's journey of our lives. And it's based on a life-saving belief that there's more love here than I'm getting. And when we embrace that life-saving belief that there's more love than we're getting, we set out on this quest to figure out the rules we need to follow in order to get that love. The part of us that becomes the holder of those rules that we're figuring out is our inner critic, becomes our inner critic. In the process of figuring out those rules, there are really 2 sets of rules that we have to figure out in order to get love. One set of rules is, how do we have to manage the people around us in order to get that love? The other, which is really important in relationship to shadow, is what parts of us do we have to cover up in order to get that love? And there are 2 dimensions to what we discover we need to cover up in order to try to get that love. We cover up aspects of ourselves that we figure out, learn, or are told are not good. And we also cover up aspects of our light that we discover are too much for other people. And that's golden shadow. So we have a leaden shadow, if I can use an alchemy metaphor, transforming lead into gold. We have leaden shadow, which is the parts of us that we figure out are somehow negative, whether right or wrong. And we have golden shadow, which are the parts of our light that we learn we need to hide because they're too much for other people.
Right. So this process of trying to hide these parts of ourselves that we judge to be negative, right? Lead, let's just call it. We're kind of naive to think that we can just hide the bad without hiding the gold, in a sense. Is that right?
Well, absolutely right. There's an old saying that feelings are never buried dead, they're always buried alive. Well, the same thing is true about parts of ourselves that we put into hiding. We can't kill off. We can't bury those parts of us dead. We buried them alive. And And I refer to the holder of those parts of us that we put into shadow as our Pandora's box. This box of that's a hiding place inside us to keep away from ourselves and from other people those traits so that we can attempt to get the love we need as children.
You know, that's so interesting. I've met people in my life that, and any man who's been around the Mankind Project or involved in any form of transformational men's work, will have a chance to witness someone do some very powerful shadow work that takes them back to a time where they learnt that childhood behavior, where they learnt that survival game, let's call it. And how they're turning up as a 67-year-old man in their marriage, with their grandkids, in the workplace, is exactly what they learned when they were 4, because of this instance or this environment they were raised in that taught them this is the way that you can survive. There are no other ways to survive.
Exactly. It's funny you should say 67-year-old man, because as we record this, I'm 67 years old.
There you go. Wow. Oh, that was a bit of a fluke, but hey, there's no coincidences in these.
No, not at all. And you're quite right, because we've practiced our survival plan, which, once we've got our Pandora's box that we're throwing all of these parts of our lead and our gold into that seem like they're interfering with us getting the love that we want, then we have an inner critic that holds the rules that we're supposed to follow, and we adopt a mask, a persona that is a combination of authentic parts of us that we're over relying on to compensate for authentic parts of us that we've put into hiding, and then fake things to kind of substitute for the parts that we're hiding. And by the time we become adults, we've been practicing our survival plan for so long, because we needed to survive, that we think that's who we are, rather than that's how we survived.
That dichotomy of an experience where this is the mask I put on to survive my household, elementary school, middle school, high school, college, the workplace, relationships,
spiritual, religious training, everything.
I recall a time, this is when I was getting really deep into men's work in our men's group on the Gold Coast, our I group, as some people call them. And each week I was turning up with the same shadow, not able to get a grip on it. And continually I had men that were holding me and supporting me and calling out what I was not willing to uncover and look at. I was so blind. Talk about blind spots. I was so unaware and disconnected from who I was at my core. Like my character before all of this, this shadow stuff coming into my life and these survival mechanisms, that I felt like I was breathing through a straw. That's how I described it to the men. I feel like I'm breathing through a straw. And when I had that moment of touching the gold for the first time in my life, I've never experienced anything like that since, aside from some plant medicine journeys I've been on in South America, of actually uncovering, taking all those layers of the mask off and seeing the gold there. No wonder I was having imposter syndrome in the workplace, in my businesses. No wonder I couldn't turn up in relationships and be myself, because I was playing out this other life that wasn't me. It was this thick coating of masks or makeup that was really trying to not only portray this attractive image of success, but protect. I was trying to hide behind the mask of all of the nitty-gritty, dirty stuff underneath. And I tell you what, it's one of the scariest things I think I ever had to do, David.
Yes.
Was go there.
And that's really the second true hero's journey of our lives. The first hero's journey is the quest for finding more love than I'm getting. The second is finding the courage to uncover and reclaim the parts of us that we put into hiding in order to get that love. Because the fear, and it's a justifiable fear, is that if we take that second journey, the process of discovering what we will discover inside us will cause us to feel like we don't know who we are, that we're losing our identity, when paradoxically, we're actually gaining our authenticity.
That's what makes it so bloody scary, is that finding who I was it was like swinging from a vine. Like coming up to the next vine to be able to grab it. Nope, I'm just hanging onto my vine. I'm not brave enough to take that leap. I think a big part of that for me, David, last time we spoke, I said one of the beauties of my role is I get to be psyched by some really experienced and smart people. So working as a case study, for me, I had this very confusing upbringing of very loving, supporting parents who told me, be as big, bold, beautiful as you want to be. And then I go to my all-boys private school where, I don't know if you've heard of tall poppy syndrome.
No.
Basically, it's all over the world, but Australia is very known to have this. Tall poppy syndrome is, basically poppies are a long stem flower, and if one grows above the rest, you're supposed to trim it. So in our culture,
got it.
It's very common that if anyone starts achieving great things, that you naturally have to bring them and cut them down to size.
That's a great metaphor. I haven't heard that before, and I love it.
It gets me more fired up than anything when I see people dimming their light for the appeasement of their peers, when their peers are too afraid to go to higher degrees of growth and be ambitious enough and bold enough and brave enough to take those leaps. So instead of doing that themselves, they're going to pull someone else down. So for me, I was so confused growing up where my parents are saying, be big, bold, say to the bully that they're pathetic, and then I go to school and anytime I achieve something, the opposite of praise.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Why would I want to achieve then? But I have this gift, this thing inside of me. I know it's there, but I've never been able to spell it out. I've never been able to identify it. Just my intuition's telling me something is there. But how do I access it? Because it was caked on with so much conditioning from school, from peers, that no, Brandon, you can't be big. You can't be bold. You can't be beautiful. You can't shine. If you get big, other people are going to feel small. So don't be big.
That's a gorgeous description of golden shadow.
Wow.
And so I think what you're leading to is how do we make that journey to into our shadow and into reclaiming the parts of us that we did need to put into hiding? How do we kind of lubricate that journey to give ourselves more permission to take it?
Yeah.
And can I offer just a very, very simple starting place for that?
Please.
Gratitude. Gratitude that we were intuitively genius enough as children to figure out what we needed to hide in order to survive.
Wow. Smart little whippersnappers, aren't we?
We're brilliant whippersnappers if you think about the anatomy of a survival plan, we got the happy ending fantasy that says there's more love here than I'm getting, and the rules we figure out we need to follow in order to try to get that love. And the parts of ourselves that we put into hiding, into a Pandora's box in order to do that, and the mask we adopt in place of parts of our authenticity, and then the anesthesias that we have to adopt in order to numb the pain of turning ourselves into a pretzel in order to get love and not succeeding at getting the love anyway. To invent all of that as children intuitively is utter, total genius. And when we step into gratitude for having been genius enough to do that, it opens up the doors to reclaiming ourselves with a minimum of shame for having done this, because we understand the noble, life-saving, important reasons why we channeled our genius in those directions.
Can I get a hallelujah?
Hallelujah. Amen.
I mean, that I've never thought about it that way, because instantly what comes to my mind is, well, I'm far more capable as an adult today in what I know and my experiences that gives me some form of intuitive edge than when I was 4, let's just say. I just need to get past some of the stigma associated with this work and whatever nonsense is creating a story in my head and holding me back to begin the journey. Before we get into the steps after gratitude, I want to speak to 2 things. Number one, I want to speak to what we term sideways behavior, like the hiding, repressing, denying, when we can no longer do that and what it looks like when it finally makes its way out. And number 2, the stigmas associated with what people coin neurosis, right? This shadow side of ourselves that people want to slap a pretty scary label on. So where do you want to start out of those 2?
Well, let's start with the second, because the whole purpose of psychological diagnosis that people often forget is really for insurance reimbursement in psychotherapy. Unless you can provide some kind of recognized, accepted diagnosis in psychotherapy, then if somebody has health insurance that covers psychotherapy, without that diagnosis, they're not going to get reimbursement. Once you understand that that's just part of the game, it's easier to not get locked into the diagnostic label, because all of these diagnoses psychologically are simply about different configurations of symptoms of shadow.
Wow. Man. You're breaking my brain, Doc. Well, thank you for saying that, because I, for one, am so hurt when I see, and this is not all people, this is not all cases, this is not all parents, but I'm so hurt when people have a troubled child in school, possibly at home. They take them to get evaluated, the kids get slapped with a label, they get medication, and then it's like, dust their hands off, cool, problem solved. And I'm like, the kid has ADHD. He has Cocoa Puffs for breakfast. You're giving him fruit roll-ups for lunch. He's strapped to a desk for 8 hours a day and he's 7. I think the kid just has some energy he needs to get out. Now, I'm not the expert. I'm not. But labels can be so damaging and dangerous. I mean, there was a man in my group, this little anecdote, his stepmom, he didn't have a great relationship with his stepmom, came on the scene after his mum passed away. His stepmom told him his whole life that he was bipolar. He doesn't remember getting evaluated, but she assured him he was bipolar. That impacted his work, that impacted his relationships, that impacted his, failed relationships. And then he finds out at the age of 38, he goes and gets evaluated. They say, you do not have bipolar. Like, what a prison sentence that is to slap onto a kid.
Totally. And that's the shadow side, or part of the shadow side of diagnosis, is that it becomes this thing around which we build our persona, we build our mask. And there's a technical term for that. It's called illness identity disorder. That's not a formal diagnostic label in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Psychiatry and Psychology, but it's well recognized that when people get a diagnosis that feels damning to them or life-threatening to them, they build their sense of self around that diagnosis. And it's even more damning when the diagnosis is inaccurate. And on top of that, the other shadow aspect of diagnosis shadow is that we use those diagnostic labels as pass cards. Well, I'm entitled to get away with, pardon my French here, bullshit, because I have this diagnosis. So, you gotta cut me slack, because it's just the way I am.
It's that full stop, because we don't like gray area. Our brains don't. They want black and white, and they go, well, my marriage failed because of that.
Yeah.
I can't get in shape and lose the weight because of this.
Exactly.
And yeah, it definitely can become a crutch, can't it?
Yes. Yes. That's part of the shadow side of diagnosis.
Wow. So I think, what's the process if you've got someone coming in to see you or sit in your circle to do some shadow work, but you see they've got some of that commonly male kind of attitude towards personal work of like really not wanting to look at it, and it must be weak if I have to admit that something's wrong. How do you help break down the stigma associated with it to a newcomer coming into this work?
Right. Well, a couple of ways. One is that whole framing around you came by this honestly. You didn't invent this stuff for the sport of it. You invented it intuitively as an act of genius to save your life. So taking away the stigma from that perspective. Second is that because of how dysfunctional society is generally, I mean, thank goodness there are individuals in society that aren't as dysfunctional as our society in general is, but because of how overall dysfunctional our society is, no one in their right mind should enter into adulthood without having developed some amount of shadow just to cope with that until we've reached a point in our development as human beings where we have enough internal maturity and internal resources to step out of that bondage into our authenticity. So the normalizing the fact that we've got shadow and normalizing that we have blind spots is really helpful. Have you heard of something called the Johari window?
No.
So this may be a valuable framing as part of answering your question, if I can go into that.
Yeah, absolutely.
So Joe and Harry are the first names of the two people who developed this grid. It's kind of like a 4x4 table, and it has to do with aspects of ourselves that we know and don't know that others know and don't know about us. And so there are things I know about myself that you know about me. There are things I know about myself that you don't know about me, not because I'm keeping secrets from you, but because we don't know each other really well. So you haven't had an opportunity to spend enough time around me to know those things about me. There are things that you know about me more clearly than I know about myself. And there are things about me that neither you nor I know about me. Well, where the gold in shadow work is in that third variation, things you know about me that I don't know about myself. And any person who's dedicated to their own development as a human being, as a partner in relationships, as an influencer, as a leader, as any part of their lives, who doesn't recognize that part of being human includes there being parts of us that other people see about us more clearly than we see about ourselves. If we don't step into accepting and learning from that, we're never going to develop into the highly impactful, gifted light bringer that we're meant to be. And when I normalize things that way, it makes it easy for CEOs to step into owning that, yes, of course, there are things about my impact that other people see more clearly than I do. And that's what opens up the door to shadow work.
And it's the beauty in the cracks and the crevices and the little lines, the imperfections, the flaws. When I can see that in someone close to me and witness it and not weaponize that I know that I see this thing, and to accept them for those flaws, and they see mine and they can accept mine. In fact, they love the flaws in me because it's helped craft whoever I am today. That's true connection. It goes from a head level connection to a heart level when I can see a blind spot on you, David, and care and love about you enough to share it with you, what I'm seeing. Now, I might not be seeing it the right way, but something I'm witnessing is there. And then you get a chance to go, wow, okay, interesting. I didn't see that. Thank you for bringing that to my awareness.
Exactly.
It's layers. There's layers to this. It gives us layers in our relationships, professionally and personally. And I'm working with a company right now here in Tennessee, and the CEO, she's what the world needs. She's what is needed in leadership. She's in a 79-year-old manufacturing company, and she is leading this company that's been around for a long time. There are people working there that have been there longer than she has, and she leads with such empathy and such heart, and she's so aware of her work and continued work, and she's done so good to translate that into her professional life. It's just a joy working with her, because it's what I would argue is the missing piece in leadership, is that self-awareness, that continued investigation of self, and the empathy to see that in others, to understand that we're all Swiss cheese. We've got holes all over us, inside us, outside of us. That's just a part of being human. We're just trying to get by with what we know in this phase of life.
Yes. Yes. And, I love what you're saying. And you're touching on another dimension of shadow that might be worth our illuminating, which has to do with love, actually. There are two flavors of love. One comes from the masculine archetype in all of us, no matter what our gender is or what our orientation is. All of us have masculine qualities, masculine aspects, and all of us have feminine aspects. And the divine feminine form of love is nurturance. It's empathy. It's exactly what you were just describing. Divine masculine in all of us, the form of love that divine masculine expresses is challenge, being challenging. And when there's empathy without challenge, that turns into indulgence that teaches people entitlement. When there's challenging love without empathy, that there is shaming and tyranny and coercion. It's not an either or. It's got to be both and. It's got to be an internal marriage between the divine masculine and divine feminine in us.
I think that's so important. And, some of the listeners might not be as privy to some of the language that we're using around masculine and feminine just yet. But those two different approaches to connecting with someone, and I see what you're saying now. The empathy is important, but without the challenge, it seems kind of flat. The challenge is kind of like the yeast in the dough, right? That helps it rise. And that's what I love so much about men's groups, especially the men I've been able to sit with in my groups, because, and for those listening that might have some hesitation to get involved, whether it's in the Mankind Project or a men's group near you, your feelings are valid, but you got to give it a shot. Whatever your trepidation is, listen to, at least acknowledge it, but you got to check it out, because when you've got a bunch of blokes that care about you enough to call you out on your blind spots in a loving and empathetic way, and then challenge you because they care about you, almost like your buddies in sport, like they're cheering you on to have this thing happen. They're not condemning you for what you're doing wrong. They're there for you to help you work through that shadow, to acknowledge the shadow. And here's one of the cool things as well. You might check in with, what I love about shadow, I've been learning, is I treat it like baseball cards. I've got all these different shadows, and the digging I've done over the years, I've got I'm not worthy, common one. I've got the perpetrator. I've got the seducer. I've got the fuck you. I've got all these different kind of playing cards of shadow. Not once have I ever checked in present with that shadow that another person in the room hasn't raised their hand and gone, yeah, me too, man.
Exactly.
Yeah, me too.
Exactly. So when we humanize it, when we recognize that this is part of being human, and on top of that, as I was referring to earlier, when we recognize that we developed these things as a intuitively genius act of survival when we were younger, that takes the shame away. That makes it palatable to delve into those aspects of ourselves that have been preserved for us, that have remained hidden and preserved alive in us for us to finally pull back out and harvest gold from.
Yeah. So in reference to the stigma associated with shadow work or delving into these so-called neuroses, I believe it's the opposite of weakness. I think we can call that out now and say that it is the opposite of weakness. It is strength. It is bravery. It is courage to go deep. If we're talking hero's journey, you're going into the cave to face the dragon. And
right.
You will likely die.
Yes. Your notions, your survival-oriented notions of who you are will die.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for elucidating that point.
And
you'll be okay, but that part will die.
And it's the phoenix rising from the ashes. What will rise as a result of our mask, our persona dying, is the fullness of our authentic self. So that's a death worth going through.
Yeah, it's worth going through because the relationships get deeper. The abundance becomes more abundant. The sex gets sexier. All of it gets better. The life, you can smell things more. You can see things more. Things taste better when those masks are removed, not playing some role. It really is someone else's life when that persona is at play, trying to achieve the things. And it's so wild, this stuff. And so, okay, stigma removed. If you've at least listened to this point, let's remove any of that stigma of doing shame work. Right, and doing shadow work and all of the above. Now, let's talk about when the lid blows off, right? This hiding, repressing, and denying point. Moment of vulnerability here. I was not a previous relationship. I was not in a really good place in this relationship. This is before I'd found the Mankind Project, I will say. Communication wasn't great. Some things were happening, and I end up going with her to a party, new people, never met them, and we start drinking rum, just straight rum. Before long, it's almost like a blink, and I wake up, I'm in bed, I am in agony, absolute agony, I couldn't open my eyes, worst hangover of my life. And there she is sitting at the end of the bed saying, I am so disappointed in you. Oh, it's a knife to the gut. I don't even know what I've done. So disappointed. I end up finding and digging through seeking some information that I had got into it with another guy. Stupid masculine stuff, beating the chest. Oh, I can drink this rum faster than you and all this nonsense. Gotta love your early 20s. I end up knocking over a family heirloom vase and smashing it to pieces, and then the whole party turns against me because I accidentally knocked this vase over. I lock myself in a bathroom, punching walls, slamming doors, crying profusely. I don't remember a single thing. This is all a retelling. And that, to me, felt like the lowest of the low. Now, upon reflecting on that, living through that, rum's not my particular poison, I'll say. These days, I can't really taste it. I can't really stomach the taste. But I realize now, looking back, that was the first time that Mr. Nice Guy Brandon, Mr. Perfect Image Brandon, Mr. Success couldn't hold down that shadow anymore. I had hidden, repressed, and denied it for 22 years up to that point, and the lid just blew off. All I needed was a catalyst, and that was getting plastered.
Yes, that was the wake-up call that you needed, and
it stung enough.
And I think this is important about uncovering shadow, having to do with the law of wake-up calls. So, is it okay if I say something about that right now?
Please, yeah, go to it.
So, mostly people change not because they see the light, but because they feel the heat. And the heat is provided through these wake-up calls. We get these little nudges that are trying to get our attention about things inside us that we need to deal with. And when those nudges first start happening, they happen at low levels of intensity. And so the temptation is to kind of press the snooze button on the wake-up call alarm clock, if you will. And the law of wake-up calls is that when we press the snooze button, the universe in its patient, loving benevolence simply reissues the wake-up call again at some future time at a next higher level of intensity. And if that next higher level of intensity of wake-up call isn't high enough to help us feel the heat, then we'll ignore it. And the universe, in its loving, benevolent patience, will reissue the wake-up call at a next higher level of intensity and a next higher and a next higher. And when we finally have the intensity of wake-up call that is intense enough for us to finally say, okay, I'll deal with it, that's when we break through into willingness to deal with this forbidden land of our shadow.
And I tell you, once I was so aloof to those nudges, right? I was so aloof that I was hitting those snooze buttons. But once that had happened, come on, I could see them all clearly. It was right in front of me the whole time. These signals were happening saying, Brennan, you're being a jackass. Brandon, you're behaving in these ways that aren't who you are. The mask is getting thicker. Brandon, it's happening. I couldn't see it at the time. Things had to get worse before they were going to get better. And I'm not going to say hate to say, but have to say that wasn't the lowest. It got worse from there, because that itself was somewhat of a wake-up call, but I still hit the snooze button because I wasn't prepared to do the work. And we see this in men's work all the time. After the drug abuse, after the incarceration, after the infidelity, after name it, it's usually after the fact that people get involved in this work. And as sad as that is, and of course we are here for those men after the fact, regardless, if so long as they want to be a better man and they're committed to not perpetrating whatever those behaviors are. But I want to ask you, David, how can we get involved? How can you invite a man to move through whatever limiting beliefs they have around shadow work, to open that lid, maybe let the air out of the balloon a little bit to take away some of that shadow pressure? Because you might have someone coming in, the model of success, the wife, the kids, the dog, the picket fence, the money, and they have been holding on to this stuff for so long. They are terrified to lose everything if that's to come off. After gratitude, what are the next steps?
Beautiful question. And I want to answer that question. Before I do, you've just said such juicy stuff. I want to underline some of it first. What you're referring to about wake-up calls is something that I refer to as watershed wake-up calls, where the wake-up call is finally intense enough so that the most painful experience of our life becomes the greatest blessing of our life, such as when my first marriage, which everyone viewed as the marriage that was bulletproof, crumbled and ended and brought me to my knees. I was bludgeoned into surrender around facing aspects of my shadow that I didn't even know were there. And I unfortunately needed that crumbling in order to finally come to grips with. Those are watershed wake-up calls. And they are the experiences that bring us into growing. So with that as kind of the background, before I answer your question, going directly to your question, after gratitude, what we need to start doing is we need to start looking for, or have pointed out to us, what I call vapor trails, the clues that shadow is in operation even when we can't see the shadow piece itself. And what I mean by vapor trails is that when we look up at the sky on a clear day, if a jet has passed overhead, there is a vapor trail that we see that is left in the wake of the jet. And even if we can't see the jet itself, we know it was there because we see the vapor trail. So when we're starting to do shadow work, what we're looking for is those vapor trails, and the vapor trails that people can relate to are things like their inner critic, limiting beliefs, their projections, the things that they project onto others because they don't see their version of those things, emotional charges when they have strong emotional reactions that feel to them to be out of proportion to what the situation calls for. These are vapor trails that everyone can relate to on some level. And unfortunately, what most people who aren't yet fluent in shadow work, they don't have shadow literacy yet, don't realize is that those things that they are aware of, those symptoms that they're aware of that I just described, are symptoms, vapor trails that shadow is active. Once they put two and two together and they connect those symptoms with the fact that shadow must be active, that's what opens up the motivation and the willingness to discover what that shadow is, what that jet was that passed by that we didn't see because all we saw was the vapor trail.
That's a great metaphor. I'm trying to think. It was so long ago, gosh, feels like it. Because let's go to the depths there. Let's go to the lowest point. It wasn't long after that incident with my run-in with rum that I attempted to take my life. It was amidst a panic attack, not a time to get behind a car, but the wheel of a car. And yeah, I pulled away from the tree and just couldn't comprehend the scrambling of my brain and my heart and my soul and everything. Went home, cried for like 20 minutes, just face down, and I had not cried in a long time. I'm talking years. So that was very cathartic. And I got a phone call from a friend of mine that I actually got into men's work. I got him into the men's group. I wasn't going to it. I could tell you everything about it. I could tell you how important it was and how great it was.
It was for everyone else, not for me.
But for it, because I'm so smart and, so successful and all that wank BS.
Yeah.
And I go to this group, and without their help, I don't think I would have seen the vapor trails. I'm afraid to say it probably would have got worse. And I probably wouldn't be here. It's so necessary in my judgment to find people. No one can walk in your shoes. Let's illuminate that first. No one can fully walk in your shoes. But I promise you, there are people out there that have gone deeper, that have felt harder, they've hit rock bottom 20 times. And it's through their experiences and their wisdom and their ability to feel where you are. For the men in my group to feel where I was and then challenge me to turn up in a different way, that hands down saved my life. Without a doubt. Don't take on this journey alone. This might be your shadow, your story, your experience. I want to encourage you to be open to the possibility that out of 7.5 billion people on this planet, there might be someone that has some insights into your experience. And it doesn't have to be your dad or your mum or your friends, or it could be, honestly, it could be a stranger. In an organization like ours, there's Sacred Sons, there's other groups out there. There are professionals out there, but don't do it alone. I really, really need to hit that button over and over. It makes it so much easier. Let someone else carry the weight with you.
Yes. There's a saying that captures the heart of what you're talking about, which is that while we must do the work for ourselves, we can't do it by ourselves. And the same thing was true with me, Brandon. When My first marriage crumbled in 2002, and I was, as I refer to it, bludgeoned into surrender. Where I finally got around to getting involved with was the Mankind Project in November of 2002. I heard about the Mankind Project before it was even called the Mankind Project. I heard about Wild Man Weekends in the second half of the 1980s. The 1980s. It wasn't until 2002 that I finally made a priority of getting involved with the Mankind Project. Up until then, what I was saying to myself was, yeah, this sounds really good. This sounds worthwhile, but, I don't have time. Yeah, right. Well, I had to pay a high enough price. The wake-up call intensity had to be high enough before I started to feel enough heat to take action, because seeing the light wasn't enough.
Because that was your process.
Yes, that's the journey. That to me is the soul growth journey. We have, in my experience, we have smaller life lessons that we learn along the way. And then we have life lessons that are so huge that they take the better part of a lifetime to learn. They're soul growth lessons. They're not simply life lessons. They are lessons in the development of the core of our souls, of our spirits. And those lessons are so vast, they're designed to take the better part of a lifetime to gain mastery over. They're not one and done. They're repeated over and over at higher and higher levels of clarity, but we keep cycling back to those themes over and over again and healing more and more subtle layers of those themes.
Yeah. The last time I hit bottom, I had a mentor say to me that, Brandon, you've just experienced a soul wound. It didn't just cut you on the arm or the leg, it cut you in the chest. And it's cut you right down to your heart. It's up to you what you fill that space with. And best thing that's ever happened to me.
Right.
Yeah,
go ahead.
Go ahead.
I call those awful gifts, with awful meaning the double meaning, the usual meaning of the word awful, and then the other meaning, which is full of awe.
Yeah.
Awful gifts. The gifts that if we harvest them, they turn into sources of profound gratitude, even though we hope that bludgeoning never happens again.
Yeah.
Wouldn't miss it for the world. Hope it never happens again.
Yeah. I sincerely hope it doesn't happen again, but you know what? If it does, I'm sure it's for a reason.
Well, that's part of the maturing process, is reducing our pain tolerance levels so that it takes lower levels of pain to serve as wake-up calls. Because as we lower the amount of pain that we will tolerate, we start answering wake-up calls before they reach a level of intensity that tears our hearts, our souls, and our lives apart. That, to me, is the maturation process. The maturation process is not that we stop having wake-up calls and we stop growing. It's that it takes lower levels of pain to wake us up to something that needs our attention, so that we don't have to be bludgeoned anymore in order to grow.
Yeah. There was a leader in my men's group that used to say, Brandon, why are you putting your hand on the stove again? And that was a good one for me to be like, man, I am choosing to go through this suffering and this pain through my actions. I think to all of this, and this is what I would like us to finish on before we can find out a bit more information about you, David, and your projects and your books, that in the descent into the cave, shadow work, if we use the hero's journey, going into the cave to fight the thing that we're most terrified of, it's Luke facing Darth Vader, right? rather than slay the dragon, if we're looking at the shadow as a way of slaying it, befriend it and learn to ride the bastard. Because the shadow serves a purpose. It helped us survive childhood. And, you could have gotten involved in the Warrior Weekend adventure in the 80s, right? Early iteration of the Mankind Project. Who knows where that would have taken you? It had to be until the early 2000s that you went through what you went through to be the man you are today. The shadow has served a purpose for you to be there. That soul wound is a scar. And that scar reminds you of an incredible journey that you went through and survived. And it prepares you for the next thing and the next iteration. It prepares me for my relationship now. It prepares me for the man I want to be today, tomorrow, having been the jackass.
Yeah.
And all those other masked iterations of who I thought I was at the time.
Yes. You're so right to point out that this is not about slaying the dragon. Not only is it impossible to slay parts of us that we put into hiding, it's foolhardy to want to slay parts of us that we put into hiding. Those parts of us need to grow up. They need to be matured. They need to be wizened. They need to be drawn out into the light and evolved into their full actualization. So, for example, with our inner critic, we don't want to kill off our inner critic. We want to grow it up into what it's meant to be, which is an inner steward. The steward archetype is about preserving stability, organization, predictability, and standards, not about shaming ourselves and blaming others. So anybody who wants to kill off their inner critic, it's the same thing with killing off our critic. Wrong strategy, because this is a treasured, important, valued part of us that just simply hasn't actualized itself yet. We need to actualize it, not kill it.
What a great way to put that. Well, David, you've lived up to the hype.
Thank God. I was really sweating there for a while.
All that pressure. I love opening an interview with, everyone said you're amazing. Don't mess this up.
I'm grateful to be at a point in my life where what other people think about me is none of my business. So it actually didn't bother me at all. But I could tell you 20 years ago that I would have been sweating bullets over that.
Well, mate, this has been amazing. How can we find out more about you, your work, your writings? Mate, you don't stop, it sounds like. You've always got something under tow. So what you got happening in your world, and how can we find out more?
Well, my main website is drgruder.com. That's drgruder.com. D as in David, E-R, drgruder.com. If you go to that website, you can access my academy, which is a bunch of online courses and membership programs that you can look into and investigate. If you want to look at another part of the website because you're interested in interviewing me, or you want me to provide a keynote or a training program for your group, you can look at that part of the website as well. I have a whole other set of material that is for repairing society, and if you go to hijackingofhappiness.com, that will take you to a slice of that work, as well as 5 Great Truths, 5greattruths.org.
Well, I tell you, mate, we've got to get you back on to talk about integrity, and really, for those listening, we've been talking about shadow, but David is considered America's leading integrity dude. I mean, I'm sorry, expert.
I like integrity dude a whole lot better than what I was named by Radio TV Interview Report, which was America's integrity expert. Right. I like integrity dude.
Cool. Head to LinkedIn right now and change your bio.
In fact, what I was originally dubbed was the integrity warrior.
Ooh, there you go. It's getting a bit mystical now, though, isn't it? Though.
Right. Well, the official name of my business is Integrity Revolution.
Tell you what, I think I blame company mission statements that were scripted up by lawyers. They've numbed integrity out of the consciousness and psyche, I think, out of so many people.
Oh, yeah. When a mission statement is done as a form of a mask to wear, a corporate mask to wear to the public, it is a lie of a mission statement. It's not the authentic mission statement.
Yeah. Oh, man, I can't wait to get you back on to jam on that one. So let's call that until next time. David, any final words before we wrap up?
My final word is to thank you for what you're doing, Brandon, because you're, through this podcast and the other work you're doing out in your life, you are a light bringer to the world. And we need all the light bringers that we can get. So thank you for your part in that.
This has been the Mankind Podcast, produced in association with the Mankind Project USA. I have been your host, Brandon Clift, and I personally want to thank our guests for joining us today and imparting their wisdom from their experiences in this amazing journey called life. And of course, I want to thank you, the listener, because through your attention and your support, you make it a heck of a lot easier for us to let men out there in the world know that they are not alone and that there is more than one way to be a man. Special thanks, of course, goes to my incredible team, Marketing and Communications Director Boyson Hodgson, producer and editor of this episode, Michael Russo, who makes me sound so much more intelligent than I actually am, so of course, special kudos goes there. And if you've been enjoying the music throughout this episode and all of our episodes, check out Jim, Donovan, and the Sun King Warriors. I have links to them in the show notes. Now, the fee for this episode is simple. If you found gold and insights that you believe could benefit your loved ones and those you care about, be sure to share it with them. And of course, remember that life doesn't happen to us, it happens for us, so long as we rip the pen out of fate's hand and become the author of our own story. So my friend, pick up the pen and we'll see you next week. Lots of love.